Hi everyone, my name is Loes van Dijk and welcome to LoudLaw's Responsible Business Podcast. This is the place where we demystify the strategies used by founders of positive impact businesses. On today's episode, we're joined by Margareta, experienced scaling and strategy recruitment expert. During her time as head of recruitment at EMEA at Tesla, she led the European expansion from 30 to 4,000 employees, opening 60 locations in 10 countries. As head of global recruitment, she was also an integral part of scaling Lilium's team from 30 to over 400 individuals in less than 3 years. Today, she runs Mondaysquares, a consultancy that supports founders who want to set up a scalable and a successful company. As someone who has extensive experience of working with rapid growth startups and who is passionate about diversity and inclusion, she is the perfect person to talk to us today about how to build an outstanding company culture while scaling up. And I'm very delighted that you could join us today.
Thank you very much, Loes. Thank you for having me here at LoudLaw on the podcast. I'm very excited to have a good conversation with you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And to start off with, I would really like to know what led you to being a successful and passionate advocate for equal opportunities in the workplace. Has there ever been any single moment that you can recall that really sticks out to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I'm a child of the 80s, I suppose, and I actually started working fairly early. I did an apprenticeship back in Vienna and Austria, where I'm originally from, right? So I actually entered the workforce when I was 18 years old. And it's an interesting one because my family actually has always been one that brought me up that, my sister and I, we can do anything. It doesn't matter what we want to do. So very much in terms of, you can do any job or whatever it may be. And one of my great aunts used to be in politics actually in Vienna. And she used to do an awful lot for equal opportunities, women at work, and also immigration. So I grew up in this belief that it's everywhere, right? Or it should be everywhere. And I remember even in my first interviews when I interviewed for my apprenticeship, but also after my apprenticeship, was actually quite different. So I would actually say there wasn't a single moment as such. I think it started early in my career that whenever I went for interviews, it's quite often when I dealt with the HR department, there were females, there was some sort of diversity. But when I sat in front of what I would call a hiring manager, quite often they were male and more often than others. So I'd actually say, to be fair, it started really early and it really made an impact on me. It really left an impression because what I was used to from what I believed at home is normal, I realized that it's not, right? So, yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. I think the background people have and how parents raise them as well, it's so important to how you see the rest of your life and professionally and personally. I think it's often overlooked as well.
Yeah, completely. And I think, to be honest, it's also a reflection of time. It's a reflection of time of what we've seen in the last 50, 60, 70 years. When I think about the people I work with now, or when I work for engineering companies. Years ago, I struggled a lot more to attract diverse talent or female talent, even in engineering organization. But that has changed because that has changed throughout how we live and how we bring our children up and things like that. So actually now, luckily, for example, in engineering companies, you can find more women. So we literally are a reflection of society and how we've lived in a few instances. But it is definitely, when you start to think about it, it really sets a pattern on how you look at the world, I suppose.
Yeah. And looking back at your role at Tesla, where you helped them grow from 30 to 4,000 employees.
Yes.
What were the first steps that you took when you realized how quick, but also how effective your expansion had to be?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time because there was nothing that prepared you for working in a company like Tesla, if I'm really honest with you. And there was various steps that I had to take at Tesla or even in other companies. And I think one of the first steps was obviously making sure that when you work in a HR capacity and all you need to do is hiring, is to make sure that you actually have a solid team on the people front, right? So you need to have a solid team that actually has the manpower or the power in general to recruit a lot of people. So recruiting for my own team, as so to speak, but also making sure that there is a really good reflection also in the wider HR teams to then work with these people once they get into the company and then develop throughout the company, or even in the future leave the company. So actually at Tesla, we made sure that we scaled the HR teams pretty much as fast next to scaling the rest of the business. And actually with that in mind as well, I think one thing that I'd learned from Tesla and some of the things that we did right from the beginning was actually to also mobilize our own workforce, because we realized we had great people. We recruited them very specific. And these great people knew other great people. So we made sure that we implement a referral program to literally continue our workforce and engage them and empower them to tell us more about great people that they know. And also with Tesla, it was a very unknown brand. At the time, if you think about it, 10 years ago, I mean, who had known of Elon in Europe? Maybe not that many people. Electric cars, a thing of the future, not for everybody. So we needed to also make sure that, because it was an unknown brand, from a recruiting perspective, we used recruitment agencies to help us move into these countries and build a reputation. And we did a lot of advertising. Tesla never did any traditional advertising on TV by themselves, like as a car advert, but we made sure that we advertised the jobs, and we got people to write about Tesla, and we got into the media. So these were pretty much the first few steps we actually did take in order to get the ball rolling and make it into the machine that it is today, I suppose. A lot more professional machine now. It was a bit more scrappy back then.
And when it comes to actively incorporating equality and inclusion into the hiring process itself, but also within the workplace, what kind of best advice do you have for startups?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'm going to be very honest here, is actually when I think about my career so much, and when I think about inclusion and equality, I actually never quite had to build a strategy in the companies I worked with, purely and simply because it was already ingrained in the people and in the culture of the company. So there is a need in some companies where you have to set this quite intentionally, 100%. But when I think of the likes of Tesla and Lilium, they were created on the fact, or on the basis that, as a fact, we wanted to have a diverse workforce. We wanted to create inclusion, because basically we wanted the product to be used by a wide group of customers. And that means a diverse group of customers. And therefore, both companies like Tesla and Lilium wanted that reflected in their own company. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, for me, it wasn't a strategic driven incentive. It was more something that happened by design, of the fact that we used the company's mission, vision, or values, and then create a recruiting process that would actually foster, equality and inclusion. So that actually meant that in some cases, because these companies were fairly small at the time and growing, we needed to, have an inclusive recruiting process, which meant we had to leverage a lot of people within the company to be part of the recruiting process. So people from different departments, from different backgrounds, if we didn't have enough, I'm just going to be stereotypical, right? So if we didn't have enough females in engineering, we brought them in from other departments in an interview process for a candidate to make sure that they saw a variety of people, they saw the inclusion, they saw the diversity. I think that's incredibly helpful, especially when you have scaling companies, or even large companies, to think very strategically about how you showcase to the outside how diverse and inclusive you are, as much as you live it on the inside. So when you hire, I would be quite specific about it. I would get as much people involved as possible, get them around the table, get them from all the different departments, and make sure that they see a variety. It also actually has a positive knock-on effect on your business, because quite often, people from different departments doesn't get together so often. And when they start recruiting again, it's something that unites them even more than before. And so you even get quite often a better connection between departments as a result, which is quite interesting, actually. So you're just facilitating for them to be able to do something together, which is quite important, obviously, getting some great people in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think maybe related to that, from my own experience working with startups, I think that it's often, I think, underestimated how important it is for founders and a founding team to set the standard of what they expect the rest of the employees to do. Yeah. And what I see often is that there's sort of a deflection happening where they say
Mhm.
it's not our responsibility, it's carried down throughout the team. But
Yeah.
would you agree that what the founder said and what a manager or CEO sets as a standard is really, really important?
Yeah, I hear you. I agree with you. I think it's very easy for founders to start looking at things this way because being a founder is a really hard job, let's face it, right? You have to wear a thousand multiple hats. You need to get your product out. You need to develop it. It's a really hard job. So it's very natural, I think, quite often for them to say, okay, guys, I'm hiring you to give you the responsibility. But the truth is that as a leader, your behavior is mimicked. It's kind of like a parent to a child, and I'm not saying that's what your employees are, by the way, so please don't get this in any way or shape or form that's what I mean, but it's kind of what you mimic. What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
So it does depend an awful lot on the behavior of the senior leader or the founding team in this sense, in how your employees or your management team behave. So you actually have to set the tone and be honest and open and clear so that your team knows what to expect. So yeah, it's something that shouldn't be overlooked, definitely something that's worth putting some attention towards as a founder.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. And what do you think is the value of having an inclusive team in place?
Yeah, I think there's several values in general for a company to have an inclusive team. Like we said before, actually, we think about the product, right? If you are a company that has a product that you want to sell globally, for example, it is quite important that your workforce reflects the user base, because you will be actually getting a lot more out of your product if you bring a diverse workforce together and you get them to think, and speak and voice their opinions. And I think in general, also an inclusive workforce actually sort of increases your chances to be successful over other companies that are not. It's very simple, actually. If your employees feel valued, if your employees feel heard, if your employees feel like they belong, for the base that you're all working towards a bigger vision or mission, these employees typically might have a higher satisfaction rate at work. We actually see that, there's studies about it as well, that these people feel more connected to your brand. Yeah. And therefore you have bigger successes. So there's an awful lot to be said for inclusion and diversity within a workplace, for sure.
Yeah, 100% agree. And if you are hiring certain individuals for your team, so you have an open job position, how do you actively make sure that those that you're hiring or those that are applying, that they are going to reflect the values that you want to carry out to your customers or to the outside world?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think I work with founders a lot about the company values and what that means for recruitment, what it means for people within the company, or even when they leave, so the whole employee life cycle as such. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for founders to actually sit down and think a little bit about, what's the vision of the company? What's the grand vision behind the product that we are creating, and where do we want it to be? And what sort of qualities or values do we need in our people in order to achieve that, right? So I think quite often there's companies where company values form almost organically, because it's basically the sum of people you surround yourself with as a founder, and that's fine. But there comes a point in every company where the strategy is quite important, and therefore how you then look at your people is the same. So actually, by looking at your values and thinking about what sort of behaviors do I want to have in my company, so what is it that gets us further? Is it people that are flexible, that can manage all the storms, because startups are all about storms. Larger companies can be the same. Or is it that we need extremely creative problem-solving people in order to get there? So whatever that might be. But actually, one way of ensuring that you get people in accordance to your values, or actually better, that add to your values, because it doesn't have to be the same necessarily, but they should add the values, is to establish first what you need. So let's say you have 4 things, core things, and then you build them into your recruiting process. You make sure people understand them in your onboarding process. What is expected from them? How are they supposed to behave internally, externally? How do we do things around here? And that goes through, how they interact online, offline, and even down to the fact on how they leave. And it gives you good guidance within the company to employees, to managers, on how to interact with their staff. So values are super important, and it's good to spend time on them and it's good to revise them as well to see if they're still serving you those values after maybe 6 or 12 months when you've written them down once.
And to look at a value that I think is very, very important currently, and I'm sure that so many people are increasingly agreeing with that, is sustainability. And I think it's so interesting how your expertise is at the intersection of sustainability and inclusivity. So can you share a bit about how to create a sustainable team and what the relationship is with inclusivity and sustainability?
Yeah, I love this question, because I'm really into sustainability myself, and I've done a few courses on it last year. And I'm a big advocate of sustainability in people, actually. I have worked for some amazing companies, and I have seen the different facets of startups and how they go through and how grueling it can be and how amazing it can be. But I think it's important to have a sustainable team, right? So again, as a company, I think it's important to think a little bit more again about the employee lifetime value. So what does an employee experience whilst being in my company? And then how do we want to promote people within the company? Because the last thing you want to do is get people in, train them, and then within 6 months they're leaving. That's not sustainable for your business. It's going to cost you tons of money recruiting people, getting them in, training them, and then they leave. It's not sustainable for your business. It's not sustainable for your teams because people get this, they get disillusioned. So it's more about, again, figuring out what your values are, kind of sketching out what would you like a journey to be for an employee? What do you need for them in order to be successful? And how, as a company, can you leverage that? Even if I have a small company of 20 people, it might be more organic, but how do you make sure they leverage it? So that's one thing. And then the other side is more on the emotional intelligence side, I suppose, on the leadership level. So how flexible can you be? So your business can be sustainable or more sustainable, potentially, if you want to be more flexible. So what type of departments can work from home, or which type of departments can you hire from anywhere in the world, right? So or maybe can your whole company be home-based? Because with that, you can actually create diversity, you can create more inclusion and potentially longevity, because depending on the product that you have, and if you look at the world, how it is today, you need to make sure that there's some sort of sustainability. So in one country, there might be economical challenges. You need to make sure that there is another part, maybe of your business, that sits in another country that can pick up those challenges. So it's actually quite a strategic effort that big companies typically consider more than startups, but it's also something that startups should think about. So think about the intention first of being sustainable. Think about this as the intention of having a business in the long run, and then see how you can fit, how flexible you can be and fit the people side into it. I think it's a very intentional thing,
Yeah,
generally.
Yeah, exactly. I think with every department, every industry, every business aspect, there's some sustainable aspect to it. And then I think that you have to be very creative as well with how you think, like, how can I make my own work more sustainable, even in recruitment? And there's so much focus on supply chain or products, or how you build a more sustainable product or materials, but there's so many aspects to sustainability.
Yeah, it's vast. And to be honest, if you look at it from a personal perspective, I believe, but that's just me, that we have a responsibility, to this world to make it sustainable for the next generations, for generations to come. I think in business, we have a responsibility to our clients and to our suppliers to act in a very sustainable but also fair and professional way. And it's the same with the employees, sort of treat people how you want to be treated, and create opportunities, because you can always create opportunities within sustainability, can't you, for other companies, and lift them up with you by working in a more responsible and sustainable manner. It doesn't just have to be you. Your whole supply chain can become more sustainable, for example, as a result of you being intentional with having responsibility for sustainability. And we actually see that more and more in business. It's very interesting that it's not just manufacturing environments that you would typically assume have a very sustainable way built in. That's what we assume, and we see shifts, but also other businesses now going more towards the sustainability route. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Definitely. I see so many software companies or services companies. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely.
And with us individuals, it starts with us in our everyday lives, how we as an individual affect it, because we can make a difference. The consumer has power. The consumer can decide what they buy and what they not buy.
Yep.
And as a result, you can change the product. And we see that. We've seen that throughout the last 3 years. The products that have popped up and the companies in the last 3 years probably haven't existed prior to that. It's just all for the changes we've been through in this world. So there's always an opportunity in adversity, I think, to create something different.
Definitely.
I'd say.
Yeah, agreed. And so we talked about the company values and how you can make sure that your employees stick to your values. But what happens when your brand or your company is going to scale very rapidly and you're increasing workforce at a very high pace? Yeah. How do you keep up with your culture changing, new people coming in, and how do you ensure that all employees are still happy with the current culture, and even though the company is growing so much, that they remain engaged throughout that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's definitely one thing that I think about an awful lot, because I've seen it for various times and I've learned with the times that I've been in different companies. I would say that culture has its own way of working, in the sense that you set up a culture, and within this culture you create certain values, or you create certain behaviors, right? Leadership values, you call them whatever you want to call them, but it's principles and how you operate, right? So we talked about the, problem solving, or we're talking about, putting the customer first, whatever it may be. And there is a core to your company that probably is always going to be there, sort of the core values that may be 3 or 4. A lot of companies have more to them, but the core values and how you build your company, the type of people you hire, typically shouldn't change too much throughout the time that you're going through business, unless you get bought up as a company or you integrate with a new company and they might have a completely different set of values. Fair enough. But as you scale as a company, there needs to be flexibility around culture. Like I said, there's always a core aspect of culture, but as the company grows, you might need certain aspects to get towards your culture, to get to your vision of your company in 10, 15, 20 years. And with that, the culture will change to an extent. It won't always be 100% the same. But you can help yourself as a business with that. It's really interesting. There's various ways of how you can do that. And one of the ways that I see more and more now, and I really appreciate, is that when you have a cultural change within a company, there is external consultants, for example, who will come in and they will work from the ground up. So it's not a bottom-down approach in, okay, bottom down, we need to change the culture. It's all going to be different. It's all going to be brilliant. It's more about asking employees within the company, figuring out, through surveys, through conversations, how they're feeling at the moment, how they perceive their changes, how they feel about the changes, and then get them on board and almost create workshops with them to figure out what's the culture and the behaviors that we need now to get to the next 5 to 10 years. I really think that if there is a cultural change, the more you can talk to your employees about that, the more you can take them on a journey with you, the more successful you will be. I think if you change culture and you shut people out and just tell them that it has changed and what they need to do, it's a lot more difficult for a person within the company to take that on board. It will take a lot longer than if you try and get them in early. So there's definitely something to be learned from the companies and cultures that I've seen, and the changes in companies, and same as my professional contacts who are in HR. But it's all about, what does the company need to do within the next few years. So yeah, I think that's one thing I've learned, and what you can do in terms of culture, because it will always change to an extent. That's just something we all need to understand, I think, from day one.
Yeah, I think engaging employees is really great advice. Just talk to them and include them in the process of whatever you want to do and see where they're at, because you have this massive workforce that has so much expertise across so many different things and so much experience working for a corporate, and so who else to ask than them.
Completely. And I think even as a CEO or founder or leadership team, I think it's also fair to be honest, to say that there might be a problem with the culture. It's better than hiding. I find that when you hide behind something, it typically never works out well. But if you're honest and you address it and you ask for help, the people who understand and want to help you, they will come on board. And those who probably don't want to or can't, or for whatever reason, they might not be they might not be part of your journey, but that is also okay, as a company grows. I think talking is definitely something you should always do, being honest about it and being professional about it, and get your people in it and they will help you. I think that's a good advice.
And to shift the perspective a little bit, if you are advising a sustainable startup or inclusive startup, any impact startup, is there anything you would say to them that they should not do if they want their team to be very value aligned?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? So something that I've seen, and it would be interesting to see what you think, but if you create values and you explain to your team what your values are, the most important thing is to then empower your employees, your leadership team, to act in a certain way with those values. But going back to what you originally said, is actually living them. Because if you talk about as a founder or CEO of a certain set of values and you behave the opposite, that creates an awful lot of friction right from day one, and people will not understand how one works with the other, and it causes an awful lot of frustration. So I think making values specific to the company, like I said, not so much about personal vision of a founder or founding team. It's not so much about that. It's more about creating values that will help the company. So disconnecting it from the personal side, I think that's important. And then being authentic about it, and then really making a conscious effort to living it rather than ignoring them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I agree, definitely. What I think is that if you set values, then they don't have to be amazing, because it's not for PR, it's for the actual company itself. It's for how you want your business to be to function. And I think, for example, if you take sustainability, if sustainability is a value, and you as a person, you cannot even adhere to that yourself, then you're showing already to your entire workforce that if the leader doesn't adhere to this value, why should we? And that will then just spread out like that. And then I think it weakens every single value after that, because it's empty. It's just empty words that you want to carry out to the world. Well, it's actually something that's very, very intricate to the company.
Yeah, and what's also very interesting actually is when you understand what your values are, you create your values and you take them out and you live them, it actually has the effect that your employees are a carrier of your employer brand, let me put it that way, right? So if your employees feel valued and heard and see that these values and operating principles are working well, they will talk about it. And same as with, they might start posting on social media about it, and it will give you that that added value of creating marketing opportunities if they weren't intentional. Quite often these things are built intentional, of course, because if you think about it, we live in a world where really great talent isn't readily available. There is more people, in some cases like software jobs, there's more open jobs than people, for example. So as a company, I actually need to make sure I show myself in a certain way on my website, to my customers. So if you set it up right and if you live it, you actually create an opportunity to open up for people that you want to attract, right? And this is why, we went back saying as well, you need to live it, because otherwise you attract people under certain values and they're not going to stay with you for very long because they get disappointed. But it has really positive effects that once you create your values and you shout about them, that you will attract business partners and whatnot, even investors, actually, in a lot of cases for founders. And then if we think about the new generations, or the generations that are coming into the working world now, they are very value driven. So they will want to know which companies have certain values and what can they get out of it. So it really does depend, going back to diversity, inclusivity, it really does depend on who you want to attract. So you need to see it from all sides on how it can benefit you.
Yeah, definitely. And to end up on, what has the remainder of 2022 in store for you, and how can people read more about what you do or find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously my company website is mondaysquares.com, and people can find me under the website, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm busy with my founders at the moment, helping them to sort of scale and set up structures for the company and set up really good organizational charts and recruit whatever it is that they need from a people side. I typically support my founders, and I'm also about to launch a book together with my co-author Mareike Mutzberg, she's my friend and co-author, and we're about to launch our very first book, which is called Culture Up, and it will come out at the beginning of August in Amazon. So we are very excited. We have some amazing people that contributed to our book. It's all about people, it's all about culture. Yeah, we can't wait. It's not long now. There's a few weeks left until
Very
it goes
exciting.
live. So yeah, so
All
that's
right.
that's that's 2020 for us.
Nice. That's really amazing. Really cool.
Thank you.
To end on the quick fire round, which is a set of questions that I've
Yeah,
asked everyone. Just
yeah,
answer the first thing that comes to mind.
yeah.
If you had to start over with what you're doing right
Mhm.
now, would you do anything different?
I find this a really hard question to answer, if I'm honest with you, Red, because my first thought would go to no, because I have come to the place that I am today through all my experience and learnings and failings that I've made and the good things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in some case, I want to say no, but actually, if I think about this harder, yes, I would change one thing. I think, you know, some people suffer from imposter syndrome more than others, and I'm definitely one for having imposter syndrome, and I had it from very early on in my career. And only when I started to understand it and started how to manage it, my career really took off. So in some ways, if I could do something different, I wish I could go back in time and tell my 20-year-old self to figure out how to manage imposter syndrome, that it's completely normal. And then you can use it for your advantage. And other people have it too. I never thought they did, but apparently they do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just push myself forward quicker. It took a bit longer for me now, but it's fine. I'm still on track. I'm all good in terms of what I wanted to do in my life. So yeah.
Great one. Yeah, I like that one. Who inspires you?
Lots of people. I don't think there's one particular one. Obviously, there's some great people in the media. When you look at the Obamas and things like that. So I think it all depends on what you mean with inspiration. But I equally draw inspiration a lot, obviously, from my family, from my partner, from the people I work with. I've worked with some amazing people. I think you just need to see people for who they are.
Yeah.
And you can find something that inspires you in everyone. Founders, for example, they're so brave, go into these crazy adventures to form companies, sometimes with products that don't even exist yet. So yeah, it depends. But also I think I get inspiration from just being outside, also switching off a bit, being with animals, being in nature, watching people, observing their behaviors. I think you can find inspiration in a lot of things, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Where will you be in 10 years' time?
I'd love to stay on an island, but the reality is that's actually not what I'm hoping for. Actually, I think in 10 years' time, I'd love to work with more charities, because I like doing that already. I want to work with more charities. I want to continue to support some really cool founders with some really cool products. Yeah, and some more books would be nice. So it would be nice to have written quite a few more books, and hopefully left something in the world that was helpful to others, and hopefully left something in the world that created something better, potentially, going back to sustainability, created an environment that was better for others. So yeah, let's talk about in 10 years. Let's talk about that in 10 years again. Okay, let's go back to the podcast and see what happens.
All right.
Good.
So
Yeah, thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you very much for speaking with me today. And for everyone listening, if you really enjoyed my conversation with Margareta, please share and subscribe for more. And yeah, thanks again for joining me. It was really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks a lot.